aware that this is happening. I would like to also announce the sponsors of this week's Mental Health Week for our event and also the whole week. The sponsors are BSETH and Prävention und Gesundheitsförderung vom Kanton Zürich. And with that, we are also promoting the Speak Up campaign of VSETH. Now, we would always like to have many of you join us. We're always happy to have more people. And for that, I would like to say, join us through Facebook, Instagram, any other social media channels. And you can always write us an email. Feel free to chat us up or just come to events that we have. And now for the exciting part, let me give it over to Professor Piers Steel, who is a distinguished research chair and professor of, let me see, I wrote that down. You are professor of something really interesting in the organizational behavior and human resources area at the, hold on, please tell me if I say that wrong, Hygiene School of Business, is that correct?
Yeah, Hygiene, yeah. So it's Piers Steel.
I just don't want to mispronounce it. Hygiene School of Business, and you are the author of the acclaimed book, The Procrastination Equation. Really interesting book. I recommend it. I actually just bought it today.
It is. Bought it if I can get it right. There it is.
Oh, there you go. There it is. You can get it on Amazon. Your work has been published in the world's top academic journals and is renowned, internationally known and acclaimed. So I give it up to you to talk to us today about procrastination.
Well, thank you very much, Isabel. If the Swiss are concerned about procrastination, you know it's bad.
It is.
It's not like the Irish or anything. This is being recorded, right? So there we go. And we can, so we actually did an international study, and I can back it up with statistics. So just facts. It's in terms of level of self-discipline, it is actually far more part of the Swiss culture to make sure that at 10:30 or 6:30 p.m. your time, we start. Unlike in many other places in the world, for example, in Ireland, there's an old joke there where somebody from Brazil came over and said, "Yeah, we have a trouble with mañana in Brazil," and it was. The Irish said, "Well, what does mañana mean?" He said, "Well, you know, it means putting off to tomorrow." So, "Oh, yeah, we have a similar thing in Ireland, but without that impounding sense of urgency attached to it, mañana." So there are different cultures or different levels of acceptance of it. But one of the areas where procrastination is worst is in academia. And there's a variety of reasons for that. Now, I've been doing this for over 20 years. So I know a lot of the ins and outs of this particular topic. And I've been seeing it rise ever more over my the last few decades. And we talked a little bit about earlier how it's actually baked into the very technology around us, which succeeds by capturing our attention. So all the algorithms, all the apps, all the notifications, all the feeds, they're there and designed to try and be as tempting and to subvert you from whatever you're supposed to be doing now. And with probably $1 trillion of investment into it, it's gotten pretty good, though it's going to get even better eventually. And within this backdrop of all this social media and infotainment, we're supposed to get our work done. This is a very motivationally toxic environment. So when you are struggling with it, it means pretty much that you're human, right? You are, and it's the apparatus around it designed to take advantage of features of our operating system, of our brain. in terms of decision making. We can talk about that a little bit. But for the most part, when you go on to the internet, the World Wide Web, and you are getting something for free, it's because your attention is the product they're selling, or your information is the product you're selling, your fuel. So this entire element around you survives by making your eyeballs stay on the screen for longer. And it is not designed for you to help finish your thesis. It's not designed for you to even live a better life, right? It's designed so you can help somebody else live their better life, the person who's actually going to be monetizing it. So it's very kind of dangerous in this particular way. It has value, but it also has designed to have addiction paralyses. And it's kind of like in the way that it's always kind of interesting, all the tech executives in Silicon Valley in the place, they pride themselves by not giving their kids easy access to the internet. So, you know, it's like a drug pusher would never want their own children to take it. And there's a story adage though that the last kid in the classroom who gets the phone wins. Right? And you think you have the audacity, the hubris to think you can handle that. $1 trillion of kind of attention. You don't. So let's take a little bit of a review. All right, so let's see if I can do the share screen. There we go. And that's a workshop. And I'll start it. And can everyone see that okay? All right, there we go. Here we are. Without delay, a short non-judgmental guide to procrastination. Now, what we're going to go through actually happened in 2004, and yes, Science's Canada's Science Magazine for Kids. You can see there's an equation there, which is actually quite advanced, even talking about Egyptian hieroglyphics when I was just getting this going, and discounted expectancy theory. So if they can get it, I'm pretty sure that you can, right? So bear with me because there will be an equation, but no quiz. The equation is basically this as a preview. So for those of you who are, and an equation is an attempt to model it. The full model is actually much more complicated because you have to deal with state effects. But for us, it's basically this. So expectancies, your self-confidence, your surety that you can do something well. And, you know, sometimes they break this down into two parts, you know, performance to outcome, outcome to reward. But it's basically, if I offered you two piles of money, one I might give you, one I would, you would go for the sure thing. If they were both the same size, why wouldn't you? And then the other part of money, because money is fungible, is the value. So we tend to pursue things that we like, go figure, right? Desirability and feasibility. And they tend to be put together in a multiplicative fashion. That's very rational of us. This is kind of the rational model and is used in economics. But the economic model is incomplete. At the bottom, you have time variables. So when these two get large, motivation gets large. But at the bottom, you have impulsiveness, which is how sensitive you are to delay, how much you value the now, and you have delay itself. And when these get large, so the value is in the distant future, motivation gets small. That basically is it. And now we're just going to be exploring the nuances of that equation, that one slide, over the rest of the workshop. So we can see procrastination all over the place. Here we have, for example, some values that we've asked in terms of people on a 1 to 5 scale. We asked 10,000 professions, and these are a sampling of some of the ones. But you know, you can get financial analysts a little higher, managers, accountants, geoscientists, treasurers, controllers, actuaries, and food servers right at the top. So on a scale of 5, they were just almost popping against that. and librarians and curators and people much more orderly. Below that, we can even get lower, but these are kind of a nice kind of look-see. So it also has a humorous side, a little lighthearted. That was Les Wass, I actually knew him. Very funny guy. He he was an advertising exec. He made the jingle that was associated with ice cream trucks when they come by. So they play a particular jingle, and that actually helped devise that. He also did a whole bunch of different practical jokes regarding procrastination. Like he would, or went to, in Britain, he went to the same foundry that forged the Liberty Bell and demand a refund because there was a crack in it in the United States. And he would protest wars that were over a century ago. You know, so it is kind of a funny little quirk in us. There's a lot of jokes around it. Like this is one I've dug up. Hard work often pays off after time, but laziness always pays off now. Or if a job's worth doing, it'll still be worth doing tomorrow. And of course, there's one more one, but I'll tell it to you later. That's a thinking joke. That's a joke right there. We can see it kind of permeate basically all of workspace. There's no work environment or even culture that we've gone to, we had to invent a word for it. It's always been there. It's part of who we are, putting stuff off. And we can do, because we're scientists, we'd like to do time completion graphs. So we start at 0 and we finish at 100%. And I might ask you, does this reflect your working style? Isabel says no, definitely not hers, right? But I can imagine for most of us, it's not slow and steady, right? So we could even work ahead of time and just save something to the end. But most of the time you see things under the graph. So slow percentage and swoops up. Here's one we did with actually a set on a computerized system of instruction, or MOOC really, an early form of MOOC. You can see people blowing and then they kind of accelerate the catch up at the end. But here is actually one student's journey through it. So they start off well, and at some point they say, I'm doing well, I could take a little bit of a break. And they do some work, and then they said, oh no, I should start catching up. And they start doing the same work as everyone else here, without realizing that they basically have a lot to make up for. And then there's some point within the last week or two where they realize, oh my gosh, I have so much to do. And then it just accelerates. Now, if we could extend that line right down in a straight line, if they can maintain that pace, they're doing actually 12 times the normal rate. So if it's a 12-week course, they could finish that course in 1 week at that pace, which is incredible. And we have that within us, that super a capability of concentrating and working. But it seems to release just before deadlines and not earlier when we actually would like it. You can see in work teams, same thing, slow and then coming up. This is one I actually went for governments, but there was some really good data about how long they take bills enacted in the US Congress. So you can see that as swoop, that kind of hyperbolic discounting.
Piers, we have a question in the chat.
Yes.
Gracia Brickman is asking, do you also have a best case student?
Oh yeah, for sure. Of course. It's not in the charts. I can't whip it up right now, but yeah. And some of the ones will kind of finish ahead of time. There are a few which will do that, who will get things done earlier. So not all of them are like that, but in general, on average, we're below, and you'll see variation around that. It's kind of nice when you do the graph, but it gets a little, when you have like 200 lines to work with, it gets too clunky, so we take the average. The average is definitely towards procrastination, with some lines above, right? And it gets a little thinner as you move away from that. Mm-hmm. And some lines are below. Yeah, I did that for my PhD. It was actually, it was kind of a neat kind of problem to figure out how to graph that at the time.
Thank you.
All right. So most of the time, actually, we neither get, actually, at these type of workshops, we don't actually get the people who need it most. The true procrastinator, somebody you might know, will not attend. And that's a reason why they stay a kind of a real procrastinator, because it's resilient. They are resilient to efforts to change. And part of it is actually shame. They feel ashamed of their lack of will, and therefore they try and shut it out and not deal with it, and which perpetuates itself because they aren't willing to grapple with this very human issue. So when you start off with a little humor to ease you into it, and we also kind of have this part, and this part is actually there. It's true, but it's also to give you a little bit of relief. That when you procrastinate, it looks the same as laziness, but is it? And the question answer is no. And the reason, a resounding no. And the reason why is the lazy person never intended to get the work done. You did. You wanted to. You wanted to have the motivation. It was not there. You struggle against it. That's where the shame comes from. The shame comes from the fact that you wanted to work early, and this is why it makes it kind of difficult to actually do. You kind of look at other people. Everyone else seems to be coping with this, or maybe they're simply hiding well. So when we ask what is a procrastinator, they do make the same work intentions as others. It's almost indifferent. But the more they procrastinate, the more there's an intention-action gap. So they plan to do something, and maybe they make, but something falls between goal planning and goal striving. So this is the definition I came up with when I was actually starting off on it. And it has components. You can't be forced, it has to be voluntary. If somebody forces you to delay or you had no choice, it's not a delay, it's not procrastination. You had to have intention to work. So if you plan not to work, you're being lazy. But if you had an intention to work, and you had to expect to be worse off for the delay, otherwise that's just scheduling. And we could make that a little simpler and put it like this: putting off despite being worse off. So this is by your own standards now. So if you say, oh yeah, I love procrastinating, it's fun. So yeah, you're scheduling, right? That's nothing wrong with getting the motivational boost just before the deadline. It's the easiest time to work. The question is, did you feel anxiety? Did your performance go down? Do you have regrets about it? Then if you have regret and you're trying not to do it and you feel you're not giving the world the best side of you, not that you got away with it, not that you could masquerade your performance because you have enough talent that you actually look like you're doing well, right? But are you actually happy with your performance? In fact, when we actually look at people's self are you happy with your performance, and correlate that with procrastination, a much higher correlation than with grades. Right? And when you get into a truly competitive environment, which is the transition from graduate to an academic, and they only have a 5% acceptance rate in some of the top tier journals, you need to have everything on your side as possible. And giving a second-rate version, unless you are just the smartest person I've ever seen, it's going to show. I constantly try and give the world my B game, and they notice every time. It's really annoying, right? I have to give it my A game, or it doesn't work. Still, some pools of procrastination where it's a little bit more, younger than older. This has got to do with the wiring of the prefrontal cortex, which, for example, in people with ADHD isn't even done until they're about 23, 24. And then they become a little bit better at it. The poorer than richer, that's more of an effect for every kind of point of procrastination. People made about 15,000 less a year. Men rather than women. This surprises men and surprises no women. Single or separated rather than married, which means interesting because they're putting off starting commitment and ending commitment, both ends. And they have less education because one of the predictors of educational success is conscientiousness, and conscientiousness and procrastination are like that. So we can actually kind of go through a little bit. We can take a look about what we procrastinate about. Any guesses here? You can. I've got there's a top 12 list. I just put the top 5. So put in a chat. What do you think people procrastinate most about? What do you procrastinate most about? And I can click all these interactive, and I can remove them in any order. So paying bills, okay. That would be number 4. Writing, studying, okay. I think that's 5. Education. Gym, that's health. Still haven't got the top 2. Sleep, I would put that under health. But that's actually a big thing. There's even scales on sleep procrastination because you know once you go to sleep, the day starts again. And if you're dreading that, you know if you can hold up, right, and not go to sleep, you can put off that new thing. So if that is a kind of a cleaning, yes, the number 1. Number 2 is career, getting promotion. So when we ask people what their top 2 problems in it, now each of you may actually have different levels, right? We have different things we like and dislike. Some of you may ask, I can put up, show of hands, how many of you, for example, let me show the grid video and then I can show a little bit more. How many of you procrastinate cleaning, right? And then I could ask, great. And other people, good. How many procrastinate by cleaning? Some people, yeah, some people do that, right? It's the other way around. It's kind of like the night before an exam, that's the time to clean. Got to get that everything spotless first. And we don't all procrastinate on the same thing. Some people procrastinate going to the gym. Some people procrastinate by exercising because your values are different. Some things you like more, some things you like less. It's the beauty of the world, which means we can specialize and sometimes trade off, and some things you like doing, other people don't, and vice versa. And we get together, maybe we can separate. And it works really well. It means that also what is your temptations and what are you putting off are going to differ from person to person. So even though we're all procrastinators, we're not all the same. We have different triggers and different problems. Most definitely, you can procrastinate on illnesses. In the book, I talk about my my stepmother, my weird name because my father married her when I was 25, and it's kind of like, wonderful woman, Martika. But stepmother, I guess that's the official name. And she died of colorectal cancer because she put off going into the hospital and getting a diagnosis. Terrible tragedy. Exact same thing happened to my mother-in-law. After I wrote it up in the book and she read it, both died of colorectal cancer, right? Number 1 thing that people die from in terms of cancer, not because it's treatable. It's very, 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 very treatable. If you get a colorectal exam and they go in and they find these early cancerous polyps and they zap them with a laser, very easy, right? But if you wait, like all cancers, and metastasize and spread, people die, right? So, and how many people right now are saying, oh, not all those people who are overwhelming ICUs are anti-vaxxers, right? Some of them are people who just didn't think it was going to happen to them, or they put it off, or they had better things to do. And it's like these people, how much, for example, of the people who've been putting off getting a vaccine are simply procrastinators in terms of health, right? And so, yeah, you can put off everything. You can put off small things, taking out the garbage, to dealing with relationships, health problems, to the major, to the life-destroying elements, right? So procrastination has a light side, which we started. It has a dark side. Because anything that can be put off will be put off by someone with the ramifications thereof. Right? I would say this is actually one of the most common area where it actually has its insidious effects in terms of regret. So normally if we go for something and it fails disastrously, try and go for a paper, and the reviewers, who are the prototypes of all internet trolls, in my opinion, terrible creatures who give anonymous comments to tear yourself down, while only knowing a smattering about the topic as much as you do because you wrote it, right? Sometimes I get good ones, but it's a rarity, right? There are some really good reviewers out there, but they're in short supply. But by not going for it, you create a ghost that haunts you. The ghost of regret is woulda, shoulda, coulda. I wish I had tried. And this can be romantic, right? If you actually proposition someone you've been found attractive, and they say they already have a romantic partner, which is most likely if you like them, other people do. And let me turn that off. One moment. Sorry for the delay. I put on silent, but it's still buzzing. In terms of regret, not being able to going for it and failing at the time. At the end, it hurts at the time, but later you say, good for me. I went for it. In a couple of years, once it's softened. But if you don't go for it and you think what would have happened, that is a thorn that just festers with time. In fact, also this place, which I remember when I could get to some place like that. But travel's been restricted for quite a while now. But if I'm there and I'm thinking about my jobs and obligations that I'm not doing, if that is where actually the worst part of procrastination. So yes, less healthy, less wealthy, but also less happy. Because when you're there and you should be enjoying that beautiful vista, and you're thinking about your obligations that you haven't met, and it weighs you down. And once you finish them, once you're done, that psychic release, you realize this weight you're carrying inside your mind, that thing that was holding on to it as something I got to do, I can't let go, required psychic energy to do it. And once you could open up that hand and then go forward, you feel light, almost like your feet, you feel undone, you feel free. Of course, you can have another one after that because you're going to go back to the same pattern. But it's that feeling that you're robbing yourself of. That when you were a child and you could just have your downtime, you don't have that when you procrastinate. So why do we procrastinate? What's the map of it? There has been previous attempts to try and figure this out, like this one. Suddenly urged to do laundry valley. Some people do it by cleaning, or social media forest, or daydream beach. But we're going to do a different one. I've done my own sea of procrastination papers, and here's just a sampling of them. When you get down behind it, it was that number 3. We already reviewed it a little bit at the beginning. The expectancy, the grit, the stick. They give the idea of, I can do it. I'm not sure if I like the word grit. Angela Duckworth really is just a reformulation of conscientiousness, in my opinion. I said it, Angela. I really did. But people get it if I say it that way, because she was a good popularizer. Fair is fair. So she popularized an already a common construct. So do you think you can? It's like they say everything is created twice, first mentally, then physically. So if you have, that's a problem with a PhD. You have no good visualization of what to do. And it's like pushing through an ethereal ghost at this point. You have no handles on it. It's just like, what am I supposed to do next? You don't have a good vision of what you're supposed to do next, a mental map, which is very difficult when you're traveling along a trail for the first time. How can you actually kind of, motivation doesn't form. So it's in all that there too, an idea of I can do it and this is what I should do. Next one is value or reward. In terms of this, we put off what we dislike. Right? And a lot of you, it's lovely to have exercised. It's lovely to have written. Are not always so lovely to exercise or to write. So it's becomes a problem with this. It's like, do I want to, if you're looking for, do I want to be the trigger to do it, that often does not ever appear. So if that's your condition, I will do this when I want to. There's a whole lot of things that are natural that you will not want to do, but you have to do it. So what happens? I will do it then when I'm forced to. And when am I forced to? Just before the deadline. So if you're waiting for want does not happen, ever, sometimes. And last one is delay, the biggie. Now, the other two are the contributing factors, but this is the one that really gets it going. So again, expectancy, value, increases motivation, impulsiveness, and delay decreases it. Okay. So what do we do about procrastination? See how we can affect these variables. Right? You think you can, a lot of ones about how to kind of increase self-efficacy. Albert Bandura made is basically one of his life out of moral disengagement. How to kind of increase the value and enjoyable. Do you have your specialty coffee when you're doing your work? But really, it's a lot about time, how to kind of fudge those time variables. So if we have a motivation right and time across the bottom, and then we get a deadline in, boop, right? And we kind of say, well, we know it's somewhat hyperbolic discounting. That's what it looks like. But that's not quite it. It's a little bit more steeper than that. And that happens when impulsiveness becomes a little stronger. And it's fine, right? As time gets small, motivation goes up as you get close to the deadline, right? We're designed this way. There's nothing wrong with it, it just is. But you start putting in temptations, right? Alternative activities that are more enjoyable. What do you want to do here? You want to do what you want to do. What do I want to do this? No, I want to do that, right? I want to do that. I want to do that. I want to do that until some point towards the deadline. Now, this is what's happening in society. Are those temptations becoming more available, which means their own delay function is going down? Yes. And are they becoming better? I mean, when YouTube first started, I think it was, you 2-minute clips and very grainy. So let's move that temptations upwards. There we go. Okay. Now we've made the world of procrastinators, right? Now there's a much bigger gap. And I did this without affecting you or your task. I just made it by what else was available. And that's the world you live in. You live in a world of high quality, instantly accessible, customized temptations for you. That's a difficult motivational world to be in. And we are all experiencing it. So this is the challenge, right? The world isn't going to change. There is money being made from that. Those temptations, when you indulge in them, it's money. Basically, you're either buying or giving attention or something that can be monetized. So it's not going to go away. It likes it very, very much just the way that is. In fact, they'd like to get it higher if at all possible. Even like a little bit higher. So as I mentioned, one of the most important of these is impulsiveness. Right? We can just wait for this graph to go out, which we'll never do. It's in a loop. And basically, this is somewhat genetic because, as you might expect, it's built into our brains, topography, architecture. So we have a discounting function, and it was naturally evolved this way. So of course, if we all have it and we actually can see it. Of course, it's going to be in our genes, right? You can see in terms of dualistic theory of the mind, system 1 versus system 2, which I hate. You know, there's 30 other terms for that, including Dionysian and Apollyon, like the Greek gods, hot, cold, motion versus passion. We went with system 1, system 2, because we have no poetry in science, right? System 2, prefrontal cortex. So 2 decision-making systems in the brain, right? Prefrontal cortex, really good with the abstract. It's what I'm going to be doing next week, next month, 4 years from now. Really good. It enables us to build blueprints. Enables us to build this world which didn't at one point did not exist, and somebody envisioned it and contributed to it and made it happen. It's the world of tomorrow. But we also have the limbic system. Limbic system is the earlier evolved stimulus response. It's the amygdala, and it can give you want. If you have want that really makes you crave, that's the part of the brain that does it, because that little red dot, that's the amygdala, and it has direct lines to those emotions. And what fires up the amygdala? Immediately available, short term, right? Here and now. Basically what we're pumping in. So we've actually hacking our brains in this world to actually kind of move towards more limbic system. I call it a limbic system wonderland. Just for fun, you can try it a little bit. You can see like if you take your, I think, left foot and right hand, and see, you do them like that so they're going in the same direction, right? One right now under the table. Now try and do it so they're in the opposite directions. Right? And it's really difficult to do, right? You know, like it's a kind of example of competing or separating. We see ourselves as a whole, as a coherent self. But you can actually do things like, for example, when they created split brain, and they actually, to prevent people from who are having serious epilepsy, so they cut the corpus callosum, the thing that kind of, so you had 2 separate brains. These brains now do not talk to each other. They're completely separate. And yet people still have the experience of unity, even though physically it's impossible. And there's other particular examples between the prefrontal and limbic. And sometimes you feel them both and you have this ambivalence. You want something and you don't want to want it, right? And some people call it the parliament of the mind. A little bit more as you're growing. For developmental psychology, talks about kids and if they're growing prefrontal cortex, much more limbic in the decision making. You can even do ones where people have the prefrontal cortex blown out. Phineas Gage is the most famous example, but there's Mary Jackson, who had a tumor and knocked her out. She was very, very much like you. She was going undergraduate school, straight A student, and a tumor basically meant that she had the inability to plan for the future, which means that if she saw something, she wanted it. So she became very promiscuous, very, that looks like fun, right? Alcohol, drugs, whatever, right? Always the here and now. Until that was removed. Right? There's other ones. There's other examples along those lines. Alcohol myopia, for example, is where you've heard of like alcohol is a depressant, but you drink, you don't get depressed usually. But it shuts down the mind. It's suppressing the mind. Shuts down the prefrontal cortex first. So you become more limbic in your decision making, which is fine because sometimes we overthink things. So you're a party of a few drinks, a social lubricant, and you become more loquacious and can talk easier, and that's fine. You take too much, right? All of a sudden, you're just reactive. You have no you're just doing whatever you feel, right? You're not thinking about consequences. So this is the idea now, right? We have this type of brain, and we've built a environment around it that it's wonderful in many ways, a roof over the head, steady supply of food, but it's not really for us. It's not adapted for us. We have now become the fuel for it, right? It's not there to celebrate us. It's there to exploit us. So if we want to go back to when this all began, well, these are not the oil sands of Alberta, but the sands of ancient Egypt. I assume they kind of look like that. There's the same commonality. Now, if you go into a particular part of it on the Nile, there's a town called El Kab. And in there, there's the tomb of the Fahari. And it's one of a courtier, but it was notable, enough money to have a tomb, and it was not, I think it was only raided once, so good condition. And there you find hieroglyphs of around about 1400 BC. So this is one of the first written words. This is like this is the beginning of kind of civilization, and you can see agrarian scenes, and you have that there. And if any of you are good at translating ancient hieroglyphs, I apologize. It doesn't talk about a buried stargate, but instead it says, "Friends, stop putting off work and allow us to go home in good time," which is amazing. So as soon as we invented work, we start thinking about ways of putting it off. And there's other examples along these lines too, but that's the best one. So I can go into Hesiod. Now, this is the Greeks. 600 years later, they finally got their language together, and you have people like Homer, who's now taking all the oral tradition and putting into kind of, form, and that's where it comes from. But this is when they just got the words together. And so we have Hesiod, 800 BC, and he's talking about the financial ruin of his own time. And he says, a man who puts off work is always a hand grip with ruin. And we can go through, and we have it from about the Bhagavad Gita. Undisciplined, vulgar, stubbing, wicked, malicious, depressed, and procrastinating. Such an agent is called a tamasika agent. So even back then, it was considered a sin and a problem. It was even starting to creep up, but you have to go through, it's here and there, right? You had to hunt for it. So mostly in religious texts, because religion promises redemption, enlightenment, everlasting life. If you, and far in the future, if you do these types of devotions, sacrifices, practices now. And it's like, yeah, it's a good time to do that later. And so they were always dealing with procrastination in religion, right? Buddhism, Christianity. God has promised you forgiveness, but who has that promised you tomorrow? A lot of good jokes in Christianity about procrastination. But it didn't really pick up until the Industrial Revolution. So here we have Samuel Johnson. He was writing about 1751 in the Rambler, which is actually a really interesting story because he himself put off writing this very article. And he was a terrible procrastinator too. We talk about the great general weaknesses that prevail to a greater and less degree in every mind. Now we went from something you could find here and there to an uptick. And it tracks our increase in civilization and GDP and wealth almost perfectly. The more options we have, the more we procrastinate. And we only really started studying in the 1970s. So we saw something like that. And today it's closer to this. A five-fold increase in chronic procrastination. And the reason, again, is because of the environment. Like, for example, here, all this is basically designed to exploit your limbic system. The colors, the shapes, emphasizing the immediate consummatory properties of it. Even the shelf space. You pay extra to get this stuff on these two shelves because no one wants to go down to the bottom and reach it up. Convenience rules. And there's so many good examples along these lines. You know, if I put candy in front of administrative assistant's desk and I can measure how much they eat, versus I put an opaque thing, they eat less. And if I put it further away, they eat hardly any, but it's only like another few steps. So it was the accessibility that drove consumption more than anything else. And we live in a world of accessibility where all of our things now are immediately available and can have, and our brains do not deal with that very, very well. You can even actually have it in things like suicide. You take a bridge and I would never do this, but it has happened, lower the railings by about, 15 centimeters, just a little bit lower, a little bit more hip level. The number of people which will throw themselves off in it would triple or quadruple. Going across, they have a moment of despair, and they can just instantly kind of throw themselves off. But if you raise it, so people have to lift themselves up and put themselves over, they'll live, right? You wouldn't think that something as important as your life would have an impulsive quality to it, but it does. A lot of people who actually try to commit suicide survive, do not do it again, right? It was that moment, a moment of despair in time, right? Where they could act upon it before the prefrontal cortex could say no, right? So again, the world we live in with these beautiful computers, right, that you're going through, it is a multifunctional device, which actually makes it terrible because we'd want it for one thing. We'd want a different console for play, a different console for social media, a different console for work. By having it being one of all those things, it's none of those things. And we have competing impulses from it. And because when you work, you can switch to play in seconds, that's not how our brains are designed. And we're all struggling with that. All of us, right? So if you're working where you're playing and you're having trouble with motivation, it means you're human. It means the world was not designed for you. It was designed to maximize your consumption. It means because you're a product in this world, right? And the world does not care about your dreams and aspirations and what you have to get done. It cares about making you consume. So we have these type of ideas here, right? A list of facts, right? Facebooking, social media, video downloads. In fact, the online gaming servers, where as soon as it switches the time zone at 5 o'clock, a lot of them power down because people are leaving from work to go home. Right? So people are playing a lot at the office. So that's my kind of bit about it. Now, what I can do is tell you what to do about it. We don't have a lot of time to actually do it, but we can actually go through some of these. And there's actually a lot more of these than you might expect. These are the ones I would kind of cover if we had some time. But of these, it's just a smattering. So we can increase value, right? We can affect expectancy. We can affect impulsiveness, because impulsiveness is the most and powerful and easiest way. I focus most on that. But there's a lot that can be done. And most of the time you struggled with it because your techniques were ineffective. And you struggled and you tried and you berated yourself and used willpower. And you got some effort, but nothing enough. And so eventually you try to make peace with it. This is who I am. I'm going to try and do it at the end, right? I guess I'm not going to be everything I wanted to be. I will accept who I am. And that's a reasonable choice if you have no other point. But I would suggest there are other ways of being. If you accept that this world is being done to you, it's not passive. It has a praxis, a purpose. And you are at the receiving end of it. And you can do things to actually make the world designed around you. Or you can just, some of them say, no, it's fine. I don't want to get anything in front of my temptations. I don't want to be disappointed again. I don't want to try something which doesn't work, right? So we can go forward. So some of the ones here are these ones. We can start off with pre-commitment, which is fun. Pre-commitment, and I can go to any of these others at any time. So pre-commitment is a really, really powerful technique, but it tends not to be used by those who lack willpower. And you get a lot of these type of things here, like workshops work, but they tend not to be used by people who need them most. This really works, but it tends not to be used by people who need them most. And you get always that little kind of problem here. Willpower is not designed to last forever. It's designed for short term, 15 minutes, right? Don't try and use willpower to kind of muscle your way through the day. It's not designed for that, and it won't work for that. So Ulysses' laws are after Ulysses, right? It's basically, you can ban yourself from things like casinos. So this is a form of Ulysses' laws where you can ban yourself from something else. So when the Ulysses' laws in effect, when you actually go to a casino or a gambling place, if they serve you, they are at fault. So they have to kind of basically say, no, you're not allowed to here. And respect your own ban. Some places have them, some places don't. Now it comes after Ulysses, and this is one of my favorite ones. It's like all songs to re-recorded. This is one that's being painted like dozens of times. And is Ulysses or Odysseus at the mast. This is from 1914. I think it's James Herbert. Really, look at those eyes. He captures that desire well. The other version's not nearly as good, right? And he has his men, they have their ears covered in wax, which is another form, but he wants to listen to it. So he's tied to the mast while these sirens come by and tempt him. Of course, when did he have to tie himself to the mast? Before he met the sirens. They had to put the wax in the ears before they met the sirens. So they're acting earlier to prevent themselves from acting different later. And we can graph this somewhat, right? So we know hyperbolic discounting. So at this point, long before, let's say, I want to work next Saturday, or I want to exercise next Saturday. And I go through and I say, okay, but I know Saturday morning, I'm going to be tempted to sleep in. That's my sirens. And I will have a preference reversal there because I will want that more and I will do what I want the most. Even though in the long run, it would have been better if I exercised. Or sirens, instead of seeing his wife in Ithaca, Penelope in Ithaca, he's going to die by the sirens. Not a bad way to go if you had to choose, but he'd much rather live and see Penelope. So he has up until these points crossed to do something about it, because after that, he won't want to. Right? So he knows he's going to have preference reversal. So he's going to act now to prevent himself from acting otherwise later. You can snacking, dieting, saving, spendings, working, playing, whatever you want. One's going to have, this is something about vices. Vices are pleasurable now and they have the cost later. Virtues are the exact opposite. Virtues have their cost up front and rewards later. We live in a world that likes the hyperbolic discounting and exploits that because that happens early. If you can get in there, you're more likely to make a sale. So we have a world designed simply by our architecture and free market capitalism to emphasize temptations. How else could it be, right? Right? This should be the conversation we should have all the time. It's about, societal design and how the effects of it. So people do tricks like this one. It's clocky, it's on wheels. I think this really deserves an update, something with all AI and same type of thing they do with Zumba technology. But this has just a random motion and runs off your table and hides under your bed, right? But some of you probably put your alarm clocks on the other side of the room. Okay? And if some of you are at least good about it, you leave your phone, Android or iPhone or what have you, in another room too. Because if you have it by your bed and it's right there, you're more likely to make use of it. So you're pre-committing by making it more difficult, putting your alarm clock on the other side. And there's a lot of other different examples of this. This is same thing, different idea, big snooze button. But if you push it, it donates to the charity of not your choice. So it's wirelessly enabled with your credit card information, and it will. Some people say, why are you making such big donations to the Man-Boy Love Association? I said, because I sleep in too much, right? This one was actually made in jest, but it actually, a real version was created later, which if you push snooze, will donate your money. So you can actually download it as an app. There's other apps along these lines too, ones which actually will release photos for you. This one is disulfiram, made by the Odysseus Corporation. I love that little thing. And you have no bite, which if you put in your fingernails, it makes it bitter. So when you bite them, people don't like it. They're acting now to prevent yourself from doing otherwise later, pre-commitment. But it's the idea of, acting when the prefrontal cortex is in charge to prevent the limbic system from actually taking over. Victor Hugo apparently would give his clothing to his valet and write, I assume his underwear, people say naked, and I said, how do you know that? I think he would use it be in his underwear, right? So, but he was trying to force himself to type, force himself to write. There's other ones like Herman Melville from Moby Dick apparently had his wife chain him to his chair, right? Forcing himself to write. There's other ones, for example, where you can do Mac Freedom and put it on your laptop or desktop, and it will block your access to the internet. And a lot of professional writers would do this. They will create a laptop with the internet blown out, so they cannot access it. Right? A lot of different versions of that one, but it's basically a piggy bank. So did anyone grow up with a piggy bank? Yeah, so was it one you had to smash open, or could you unscrew it? Some of them unscrew, right? If it was the one you unscrew, probably never got full. If it was the one you had to smash, probably got full, right? Free commitment, right? So a lot of other ones, there's actually an idea for Christmas clubs where you put in money and it makes it difficult to get out. There's even pension plans based upon this. Some people call it nudging, which is, I don't like the term because it's simply an economic trying to steal marketing and psychology shamelessly. We did this all well before them, but good applications with Save More Tomorrow. Also exploits something called the wage illusion. We won't go into it. Interesting. Here we have, for example, public debt. So this is the idea of the debt ceiling in the United States, where they're trying to make sure that you cannot, right now, try not to be able to borrow too much. And you can actually do one of these things yourself. There's a site which helps you create the contracts. Select your goal, set the stakes, get a referee, and add friends for support. Very simple. So let's say if I don't quit smoking, I will donate some exorbitant fund, preferably to a charity of not my choice, and I'll put it in the hands of a referee, and that will much more likely means you follow through. A lot of examples about this. So if you're having trouble with your dissertation or paper, take an exorbitant sum, painful amount, and say if there's not a draft by a certain date, that can be donated, right, to a charity of not your choice by a third. Now this person has to be a fair player, right? They cannot be someone like a spouse or someone you feel who will forgive you. Oh, that's fine. Sure, you tried hard, right? So they have to have someone who said, no, this is what you said, right? Or it's not pre-commitment. So it can be dangerous if you put it in somebody like this, right? Debt ceiling blackmail, right? We won't increase the amount unless you do everything we say. So imagine Ulysses on that mast, tied behind it, and at the end they're past the sirens, and then the sailors say, let's talk about our wages first, right? Let's talk about then you're under the power of the person who has it if you can't meet those demands, right? So interesting, particular kind of way of going about doing it. Let's do one more. Would you like to do recuperation, goal setting, energy, or stimulus control? All interesting. So does anyone have a particular goal? Because we don't have time for all four of them. I can continue doing in this one. Stimulus goal setting, stimulus control. Oh yeah, okay, we can do stimulus control. Recuperation is a fun one because it is saying you have to schedule time off. I'll tell you what, I will jump around a little bit and just do the highlights of them. I think I can do that. All right, let's see if I can do it. And we'll definitely do stimulus control after this. Don't go shopping while hungry, right? Don't go, and we can, this is basically saying that if you don't have your basic needs met, it's very difficult to focus on higher level ones. So if you're trying to do work and you're feeling isolated or unsatisfied with your life in some way, that need grows and grows and grows. So how can you focus on, if I could, I'll simply put, let's say I go on, okay, let's do the work all the time. Now, beforehand, I'm going to put one nail, it's sanitized so you won't get infected, but it's going to be through your foot. Go, now go work. You might find that a little bit distracting, the pain, right? But other types of needs happen. And this is basically Maslow's pyramid, right? If you want to get into these higher ones of self-actualization and you don't have these ones met, it's very difficult to do it. And these are all the empty stomach ones. It's difficult to focus on this if you have a lower level need that's not being addressed. And we used to have, for example, in boulder plates, they used to make them in massive and standardized quantities because beforehand you would get boulder explosions. And they figured boulder plate will make it one way because if it's something pressure becomes too big, it can actually subvert and distract you from what you're doing, right? And this is from the Bible, right? Do not withhold yourself from each other unless you agree. This is advice to a couple, to a married couple. In order to devote yourself to prayer, then you should come together. So Satan does not tempt you through your lack of self-control. You know, they're doing it and they're not allowed to say sex in the Bible. They know each other, right? I knew that person in the biblical sense. But basically they're talking about sex. And if you don't have sex, you're going to be tempted. Right? So before you go on a voyage, make sure you have sex, basically there. So marital advice from St. Paul. Are you getting sleep? Because if you're tired, you're not getting sleep, that's one of the number one, sleep procrastination, right? So 7, good, 8. Most of you would need 8, 6.5 is probably low. And there's problems with that. So most people would suggest something like this. Take your calendar and schedule in your downtime, right? Pencil in your repercussions. What is your baseline moderate? You're a human being. You have certain needs. How much sleep do you need? How much exercise? How much do you need to be sustainable? Then, right? Only then do you try and kind of actually put in your work time. And normally you're going to do it the opposite way around, right? Ignoring that you are a human being with needs and can resentment. And you want something you can commit to on the long haul. Now, sometimes you might say, I have to really redline it for this week, but then you want to get back to your recuperative, sustainable schedule, right? As quickly as possible. So start off doing something like this, right? Schedule in your downtime, right? So if you're always on, can't do it, you're not going to have recovery. Now I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Basically, and get to some of the other ones. But basically, this is what it looks like in terms of productivity. You can go really long for a short time and have a boost, but over about 4 weeks, you tend to actually tire out and you're actually back to where you started from because you aren't being as sharp as you was when you started. So yeah, you can, like everything else, some people might do it longer, some people shorter months, some people But generally speaking, you can push yourself too hard. And there's different types of recuperation. And there's some good stuff on that by Sonatag. We'll skip that one. Multitasking, and we'll get into this one. Okay. Goal setting. But people wanted stimulus control first. I can do that one first. Hear no evil, see no evil, say no evil. Those are the three monkeys. Does anyone know what the fourth monkey is? Usually there's three, but there's versions where there's four. But some people think the fourth is redundant to the three. It's from Japan. Shirazu and Kirazu are the four monkeys. Okay. Hear no evil, see no evil, say no evil. Fourth one is do no evil. But why is redundant? Because they think it's if you hear no evil, see no evil, and say no evil, then you will do no evil. Right? So it's stimulus. The stimuli creates the behavior. Right? So we've been dealing with this for thousands of years. So of course, there's people going to be thinking about it and making conclusions. It's not all modern and fine. We have historical examples for everything. So your temptations, if I have it right in front of me, right? Right in front of me, it's so easy to get to, right? Right? Time delay small, right? Value high. That's a dangerous thing to have around. Right? So when I have the temptations so available, just remember it goes up. So what are we going to do about it? Stimulus control. Can I make them less available, less obvious? You say, well, you know, for a lot of your styles, it's multitasking. So multitasking is one of the worst ways of actually going about it. It's one of those weird work styles that the more you do it, the worse you get at it. So it actually can be pretty good at the beginning, but as you practice it more, you start dividing your time into smaller and smaller and smaller slices. And it's moving from one thing to another. Every time you have to reorient your mind from one task to another, things get lost, don't get initiated again, and you lose that sense of flow. I don't have to tell you that when you're most productive, I already know. You're most productive in long, uninterrupted periods of time when you're in a flow state, right? So, and multitasking takes away from that. So you're not getting any work. And when you think of the last time you're in that golden, beautiful state, and you're doing good work, and all of a sudden an email rang, or a ding, and it took you out of it, and you couldn't get back into it, right? And so we don't want to let that happen if we can prevent it at all possible. Because when we look at people multitasking, most often they're cued from external stimuli. Something interrupted them, and they responded to it. And so I said, how can that be choice? You're not choosing, you're responding. It's reactive. So this is the way it usually works. Cues, thoughts, actions. So, you know, I usually use the popcorn analogy here, is if I go to a theater and I smell the popcorn, it's an olfactory cue, and I start thinking about popcorn, you know, would be better if I enjoyed it. So I end up buying popcorn. So cues, thoughts, actions. But none of that would have happened if I didn't smell it. Right? None of it would happen if I didn't have the kind of cue to actually do it. And we talked about the candy in front of administrative systems. If they could see it and it's within arm's reach, the limbic system gets powerful. Not to say like Gracia wouldn't actually buy popcorn anyway. I can see she's saying, no, I would always eat popcorn, even though it wasn't cute. Different values for different people, but it heightens the value of it. So some people might be reluctant basically to get the 3,000 calories that a single tub represents, right, with the butter, which is about a steak meal with potatoes and whipped cream, sour cream, and all the rest of it, with pie. But it's you know, but you know, some people have different choices. But still, if you have a cue, it increases the power of the limbic system, which creates power of temptation. So if there's rings and dings happening here, right, people are going to be more available. You see chocolate, you see a treat. Oh, you know, I couldn't. No, I couldn't have a chocolate. Oh, I've got a freshly baked group, right? Oh, maybe I could have one, right? So the chocolate, even this is visual, but you might think about your mouth might start kind of salivating just a little bit, right? You find that a little bit because it's the way the mind works by imagery, right? Or you see this and you think, your galvanic skin response might go down, right? And you think you feel a little bit more relaxed, your shoulders slump just a little bit. Or if you see this, right? Number one phobia. Now, you recognize that's a screen. So there's absolutely no way this should be at all frightening. A symbol. Why would a symbol have this response? But it's difficult to look at it. So even to look at it, you might kind of think, right? A little jump scare, right? But it's the power of imagery, right? It's the power of symbols creating a response, because the limbic system doesn't differentiate between the real and the symbolic very well. So if you want to make sure that your environment doesn't have the symbols of work, you have to dedicate them to a particular purpose. If you are working in front of the same place you're playing, I now have, it triggers as a stimuli. It's a stimuli, the location and the computer now stimuli two incompatible courses of action, leisure and play. For those of people who have sleep problems, you probably know about sleep hygiene, which means you're not supposed to take work to bed. Otherwise, your mind keeps rambling on as you go and you can't quiet it down. So they said, no, you can't do any work in bed. You have to do work somewhere else and dedicate to that in one environment. Now, the other environment should have the same type of thing, a hygiene, work hygiene. So have a separate computer for play, a separate phone, right? Keep your old phone, right? A separate everything. And like over the course of about 30 to 60 days, associations built up. And when you sit down at the computer, your work computer, it says, great, this is the workplace. And all of a sudden you find it's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon and you skip lunch. Easiest thing to do. So have an office that's temple to work. Now, while you're working at home, you're having problems with that. Because your place where you work probably had one multi-use computer in place, and a lot of us don't necessarily have a home office. And you're going to have obvious problems with that. So this one, for example, do you hear that? Well, it always reminds me of Pavlov's dogs, right? They heard a bell, and all of a sudden they start to salivate. So when you hear a cue, all of a sudden you go and check the mail, right? Because now you're in a variable reinforcement schedule. What could it be? What could it be? What could be in the, oh, it's nothing, it's another administration. But sometimes it's something. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's amusing, and it doesn't have to be every time. In fact, it's a much more powerful addictive device if it's sometimes. So you want to kind of control the stimuli around you. So taking off all the dings, right? And Outlook. And so you go and check on it when you have a natural break in your attention. You want to eliminate anything that pulled you away from your attention until you naturally mind wandered, and then you go and do it. And that's the goal, right? Otherwise, I felt some kismet with there that the internet is everything. It's just anything you like. It's dinosaurs having a party. It's rocket ships. It's a beach party. It's whatever you want it to be. It's all there. It's everything. So some people use this, for example, for helping savings. They'll have a separate account for savings versus spending. And why not have it all in one place? Because it makes it more tangible, right? You can do it for having two computers, a Dr. Jekyll, which gets work done because of the doctor, and a Mr. Hyde, which plays. And you can even use, for example, an alternate logon. So you have a different theme pack, a different sound for when you play, a different everything. So you can do it. You can switch anytime you want, right? But you have to switch. And all of a sudden you find the values, desires has gone down because the limbic system is not activated. Again, it only works if it's dedicated. If you play in the same place you work, this does not work. Food portion cues. Isabella, you have a question?
I don't have a question, but there's a question in the chat that you might want to look at.
Oh yeah. What about blind checking? Thank you. Expecting a message and checking it in case it arrived to make it sometimes hard to focus. Yeah, there are actually rules you can do. They're kind of difficult, where you can actually say, have it ring if it comes from a certain person. And so you kind of ways around. They're available in most kind of email services. You can actually make use of that. So it's, and if, let's say you have something super important and you want to check, but again, these things are things you kind of aspire to, but the world tries to push you away. You know, you try and get sleep, but sometimes you have to stay up way late, but then you try and get back to it. In terms of food, one of the biggest things is determining how much you eat is the size of your plate. You tend to put more fruit on the bigger the plate is. If you can see the amount of energy you consume, you tend to use less. Right? So you know what to do, right? How do I make my temptations harder to get to? And how do I make the cues for working easier? So if I want to exercise, right? As soon as I get home, there's all these temptations. I built it this way. We all did. We filled it with wonderful things we like doing. So when I'm trying to transition from my home to work, that can be very difficult. Or a home to exercise, because there's all these other things I can do. But if, let's say, I can go to a gym and I have a exercise bag at the gym, or I have something by the front door so I can just grab it, that helps. Now I can layer it on. I'll get a little bit of goal setting in here. If I want to make goal setting work, I need to trigger a stimulus to kind of get it going. So if I'm saying I'm exercise this Saturday, that's very abstract of you, but there's no trigger. And there's no communication to the limbic system. I'm trying to construct a goal in a way the limbic system will listen here, because that has the closest link to the amygdala, which improves its power. So I said, okay, as soon as breakfast is done, I'm going to exercise. Well, so as soon as it's done, as soon as you put the dishes in the dishwasher, what's the trigger? Yeah, as soon as I put the dishes in the dishwasher, I'm going to go exercise. Well, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to go for a run. So where is this run going to be, right? Well, I'm going to run to the park and back, right? So where are the exercise clothing? Well, I should put them out, yes. The night before this actually starts, you're going to put out your exercise clothing, arrange everything. So after you put the last dish, you just put it on. Wouldn't it be better to actually put on your exercise clothing in the morning when you're having breakfast? Yeah, that's even better. I'll do it. I'll leave the shoes by the door. And then I said, well, why don't we learn some pre-commitment? What do you mean? Well, why don't you tell somebody you're going to give them a picture of you in the park, right? The halfway point, and sharing it. Every day you do it, you're going to share this with your friend, right? It's a low level of pre-commit, but there it is. You said you're going to do something. You don't want to be caught in a lie. And I said, well, I'm doing the morning when I have energy. I find if I leave it into the afternoon and I say I'm going to go to a night run, my energy level's too low and I don't want to do it. So I have to schedule it to when I have energy. Now I'm laying a whole bunch of different things on with my knowledge. It's like, you know, weird thing. When I leave things to when I'm really tired at the end of the day, I don't do them. Or when I schedule them for any time, I don't do them, right? Or when I have a whole bunch of temptations around, I don't do them. And it's because you're human. This is who you are. You've got to kind of respect it. And so simply when I don't do things, it's because I'm not respecting who I am. I'm trying, constantly experimenting with how little I can get away with, right? And while still being productive. So be here now. Work when you're working, work. When you're with friends, engage with them, give them your attention. And when you're playing, play, right? So each one can be 100% instead of this lukewarm, half this, half that we've kind of stumbled into. Let's skip that. All right, so we're closing up here. I went a little long, but it's hard to kind of keep it tidy. But this is the idea. Motivational plan is usually a combination of them. And it fails in execution, not in the concept. These are all scientifically backed. We all know they work. They fail because people didn't go all out in taking consideration, and nor do you need all of them. Sometimes you just need one technique. That's enough. That one technique enough. And you're pushing it. It's like somebody who is below water. Until you're an inch above, you're not getting any oxygen. You're not doing any work. So you're kind of getting closer to the front, and one will pop through, and then you'll be working, and that will be enough. Right? The idea behind these techniques is to create a habit, same place, same time. That's a stimuli, right? And there's good habits and bad habits, of course. Every time you say yes to a good habit, it becomes stronger, but the same thing that happens with a bad habit. So it can be very painful to create a new habit. It only takes about 66 days, right? It's all a lot of coffee. Skip that one. Skip this one. Yeah, two months. So about this long, right? If you're doing a New Year's resolution. And so the question is, how do I get from Saturday the 1st to February the 28th? Right? How do I do that? And you find, for example, people are fading away. But in the first 2 weeks, 30%. By 3 and 4, only 7% drop. And by 3 months, 50% are at it. But look at that, a 1% drop thereafter. If you're going to go, if you can make it the first 4 months, you really, odds are on your side for keeping a New Year's resolution. It's a habit. It's getting up to that 2 or 3 months period. But even after 1 month, you've done a lot. Again, we've left undone those things we've ought to done, and done those things we've not ought to have done. Right? It's part of our human nature. It's something we struggle about. So in closing, don't feel angry about it. It's as human as it can be. It's as natural as it can be. But don't feel helpless. There's a lot we can do to improve upon it. There's no, it's just neurobiology, right? And there's things we can do if we kind of respect how susceptible we are to temptation. But the last step is you're on your own. No one's going to do that for you. No one's going to care about, no one's going to live your life for you. But some of these are very, very easy. Going in and turning off your email notifiers. Do that in a minute, right? And if you're not willing to do some of these things, then why are you here, right? What do you want from your life, right? You're going to make other people very happy, but I don't believe yourself. There's the book if you want more. It's not 100% 5-star, unfortunately. I find the 1 and 2 star, well, I'd say they come from a certain type. Here's like a 1-star. No, here's a 3-star from Rick Carter. He's knocking 1 star off, right? He actually knocked 2-star off, right? So, and there's one from here is a 1-star, which I like because it's full of spelling mistakes. And I said, well, if you manage to put in 3 spelling mistakes in 1 sentence, I guess you are not my audience. My audience tends to be people who appreciate the research, not the ones who go it. And as you can see, it's if you can appreciate that we talked about the prefrontal cortex and limbic system and free market capitalism together in a cogent way, you're my people. For those people who don't, there's other books for you. Right? Right. Final joke. Okay, thank you very much. I know I went a little long. We do have some time for some questions. I could have gotten more, but
there is a question by Lasse.
Yep.
In the chat.
Well, have you ever had severe procrastination and were able to tackle and solve them with a proposed solution? Of course, right? And the research is me-search. I had terrible problems with procrastination. I would still say I'm like an ex-alcoholic. I'm still very susceptible. It's a good thing somewhat. Impulsivity has upsides to it. Being spontaneous,